Alrighty, so to get started with the calculator, we have to create the layout. Via that, we're getting the basic structure. For the most part, this just means we are placing layout nodes. That being said, we will need just a bit of logic for the 0 button, because this one occupies 2 cells in a grid container. Shouldn't be too hard, let's jump right in. Here we are inside of Godot, and I want to create a new user interface scene that I can rename right away to calculator. Save the entire thing, I guess, inside of another folder called scenes, although it doesn't matter what you call it, click on save. And then we have a scene for layout nodes. First of all, in there, I want to add one node, which is going to be a panel, which is going to become the background later on. This node should cover the entire available space, so click on the full rect. And then we have a background. No styling yet, that will come later. Besides that, I want to add a VBox container that should also cover the entire available space. This thing is going to get 2 children. The top part roughly here for the text output, and then the bottom part roughly here for all of the buttons. The output, so the number we actually see, is going to be a label. However, for this label, I want to have some margins, which means, first of all, I want to add a margin container, and to this margin container, I want to add a label. Just so we can see something, I'm going to add some numbers to this label. Doesn't really matter what you put in here. It's just a placeholder. Now this margin container, I want to expand and take up as much space as possible, which at the moment is going to be everything because we only have a single child. To fix that, I want to add another child, which fundamentally is going to be a grid container that will hold all of the buttons. But for a bit more styling, I want to have another node first of all, which is going to be a panel container. Via that, we can add a bit of styling to the grid container later on. So add the panel container and then add the grid container. Panel container, like the margin container, should take up as much space as possible, like so. That way we are splitting up the available space in 2 parts. That being said, I want the buttons to take up a bit more space. To get that, you want to go to Layout, Container Sizing, and then adjust the stretch ratio. In my case, I've set this to 2.0, but play around with this, a different number might work better. There's quite a bit of white space at the top that you could use later on. Just see what you like the most. Now before we get to the buttons, we have to adjust the label a tiny bit. This text should be in the bottom right corner. For that, first of all, inside of the label, we can adjust the horizontal alignment and set this to right. That way we are on the right side. This unfortunately does not work for the vertical alignment. If you set this to center or fill, nothing is really going to change. That happens because you can see it with the orange frame around it. The text occupies this space. So it doesn't matter if we are at the top or at the bottom. We are only filling up the minimum amount of space, making this vertical alignment basically pointless. To actually get to the bottom, you want to go to the margin container and then click on this button here. That way we are at the bottom. Once we adjust the text size and the margins, this is going to look much better, but for now, this is good enough. Next up, we have to add all of the buttons. And this is going to be a bit labor intensive, but fundamentally, all that we are going to do is add a whole bunch of buttons. The first one, for example, would be simply called C. And this button, I want to expand on the horizontal and the vertical alignment, which at the moment means we are covering the entire available area, which I don't want. So inside of the grid container, I want to set columns to 4, simply because I want to have 4 columns. After that, we can duplicate the button 3 times and adjust the naming. The second button should be plus divided by minus. The third button should be the percentage sign. And the fourth button should be division. Then you can duplicate all of this 4 more times. Next up, we have the button 7, 8, 9. And for multiplication, we're going to use X. Then duplicate the entire thing 4 more times. Now we are getting 4, 5, 6, and the minus button. Do the same thing one more time. Now we're getting the buttons 1, 2, and 3, along with the plus button. That covers most of the input. However, we need one more row, but this row is going to be different. I want the 0 button to cover these 2 columns. Then we have a dot and the results button. To get that, I want to add another node, first of all, which is just going to be a control node. And this is going to be, let's call it a spacer. It also has to expand on all dimensions, but that's kind of all it does. It's not going to be visible. And on top of that, we are going to add a button on top of it. I want to duplicate this node, so we have spacer 2, and rename this to 0 button container. To this 0 button container, I want to add the actual button, which should then expand and fill the entire available space, and call this 0. With that setup, we can adjust the size of this button super easily because its parent node is simply a control node, not the grid container. That means when you look at the layout of the button in here, we can still adjust the anchor presets to custom and then give it anchor points and anchor offsets, which in practice means we can expand this thing to the left and cover the space that we need. I think at the moment, if we set this to -180, we should cover the right amount of space, and that looks good. In case you're wondering, the 180 we're getting by dividing 720 by 4. In other words, the available space on the x-axis divided by 4. If you have another number inside of the window or the viewport, you should use different numbers. Just divide this number by 4. In just a second, we're going to add some code to make this interactive. So at the moment, this kind of works until I adjust the window size. Then it starts to break pretty quickly, but that we can work on. First of all though, we need 2 more buttons. For that, I want to copy button 16, move it all the way to the bottom, and then add a dot in there. We are nearly done, just one more button. For the outcome, this one has to be equal. And that is giving us all of the buttons. Quite a bit of labor-intensive work to get all of this, but once you have it, that's really all you need. With that, before we finish, we have to adjust the scaling behavior of this button. And I guess we can rename it to 0 button, so it's a bit easier to get inside of the code. And to make that even easier, you can access it as a unique name. Not strictly necessary, but makes your life just a bit easier. Once you have that, to the calculator root node, you want to add a script. The defaults here are totally fine. Create, and then, whenever this button is resizing, we want to do something. For that, you can go to Node and find resized, the signal. Connect that to the parent scene, connect, and then we want to get the 0 button and adjust the offset left. The value we need here is 1/4 of the window width. And that value has to be negative, which we get with get window.size.x divided by 4. That way I can run the entire thing again. This layout looks pretty good. And if I adjust the size, it still works just as well. The important thing here that you want to look at is that the 0 is inside the middle of the button. If I comment out the entire thing and add pass so Godot doesn't complain and run the entire thing again, if I now adjust the window, the 0 goes further and further to the left because the offset doesn't adjust. So this line you really want to have enabled, and then we are pretty much good to go. With one exception, the debugger is not happy because we are dividing integers, so the decimal part will be discarded. If you want to get rid of that message, I think the easiest way of doing that is to add a warning ignore for integer division. If you now run the thing again, the debugger is happy. Perfect. Now that we have the basic layout, we can work on the styling, which is really important because currently the app looks pretty bad. For now, we are just going to add the light mode. That way we have at least something to work with the logic later on. After we have that, we can work on the dark mode. That being said, if you want to have a dark mode, you can implement that as well. The styling is entirely separate from the logic. Just choose whatever you like the most. Back inside of Godot, I want to, with the root node selected, add a theme, which means inside of theme, I want to create a new theme, which I guess we can save right away. So save as light theme. The folder is fine, click on save. Now we can click on the theme and we get the theme editor. Let me adjust it so we can see kind of what's going on. I guess this part works. Once we have that, we pretty much have to go through all of the nodes and style them so it looks good. First of all, I want to work on the background, which is a panel, which means I want to add a panel node in which I can only change the panel, which is going to be a style box texture. This is useful because in there, the texture can be a gradient texture 2D, for which I want to have a couple of custom colors, which we get inside of the gradient. The black color I want to replace with the color BAD3DE, a light bluish color. On the other end, the white color is going to be 6ECF0, a very, very light blue. Once we have that, you want to adjust these points so we get the gradient going from the bottom to the top, roughly like this. You can adjust the colors as well a bit. Just go with something that you think looks good. That's all we need for the panel. Next up, I guess we can work on the label, add the type. And first of all, we should probably change the font color because at the moment you cannot see the text whatsoever. The color I went with is 45455E. For the font size, I want to go with 80. And I guess we have a bit too much text in there. Let's cut this down a bit. That looks much better. Finally, for the font, I want to go to Fonts, the folder, and then add Unagio bold, like so. That's all that we need for the label, although to make this look nice, I also want to style the margin container. Via that, we're going to get margins to the right and to the bottom. Those values we get inside of the C tab. I want to add margins for bottom and for the right. For the bottom, I want to have 10 pixels, and for the right side, I want to have 20 pixels. That is already looking a lot better. Next up, I want to work on the buttons. For that, first of all, I want to style the grid container that holds them. The only thing we can really do in here is update the H separation and the V separation. Both of those should be 0. That way, all of the buttons are right next to each other. After that, I want to style the panel container, which only has one option, the panel. This should get a style box flat, where the color is a really bright white, F0, F4, F7. At the moment, this doesn't look very good, but once we're styling the buttons, this is going to come together much more nicely. Before we get to that though, I want to add a bit of a shadow between the buttons and the text output. For that, inside of the panel container, we can go to Shadow. The size I want to set to 10 pixels. And for the color, all I really want to do is to reduce the opacity to 10. Actually, 15 might be a bit too low, but if you toggle the shadow size, you can definitely see that something is happening. The shadow definitely shouldn't be too strong, maybe 20. It's something you really want to play around with. I guess we can try to run the entire thing, and that looks about alright. There's definitely a shadow. Anyway, I think this looks alright. Next up then for the theme. We can actually work on the buttons. So I want to style the buttons, and for now, work on normal. To that, I want to add a style box flat, which should actually not be drawn. That way, the button doesn't have a background whatsoever. And I guess what's even more elegant is to not use a style box flat at all, and instead, for normal, simply add a style box empty. We would get the same result. Instead, I want to go to color, update the font color of the button to 56, 57, 69. That gives us back all of the button, or at least the text inside of the button. And to make those a bit more visible, I want to change the font to Unagio Medium, like so, and then increase the font size. I went with 40, like so, and that is much more visible. All of this is definitely coming together. However, if I run the thing, looks good, but if I hover over a button or press it, then it's going to look much worse. Which means inside of the theme for the buttons, we have to update the style boxes for hover and focus. For hover, I want to add a style box flat where the color is E6, ED, F2. And besides that, inside of the color, I want to have the font color also for the font hover color. Once we have that, I can hover over a button and this looks significantly better. Next up, I also want to work on the focus style box. Should be a style box flat. The color I went with for this one is DEE7E. That's all we need in here. Although besides that, we also want to have a font focus color. This one is slightly different, 4E, 4F, 6D. Looks very similar to the other colors, it's just slightly different. So now, if I click on a button and the button is focused, I can use the keyboard and select other buttons. If I press space, we are pressing that button, and that looks pretty good. Now at this stage, you could finish the styling. However, what I would like to do is to customize these function buttons to make them look just a bit different. For that, inside of theme, I want to go to manage items and then add a type. Let's call this one function button. Then we get another style item for which we want to go to type, function button, and then select a base type, which should be a plain button. Once we have that, click on override all, and now the function button gets all of the styling of a normal button. To apply this styling, first of all though, you have to select the buttons that you want to style. This should be all of these function buttons. Then go to theme and add the theme variation. Unfortunately here, you have to type the name yourself. In my case, function button, or whatever you called it in there. Click on enter. And now we have a different style for these buttons. For those, first of all, inside of normal, I don't want to have a style box. This should be a style box empty. For pressed, I want to have a style box flat with the color F0, F4, F7. For hover, another style box with the same color. And then the same thing for focus as well. F0, F4, F7. Besides that, we need a custom font, which should be the same font that we have used before. And for the font size, this should be 40. Finally, we want to work on the colors. Most importantly, the default font color, in my case, is 6D, BT, B8. That way all of this looks a bit more bluish. Everything else remains black, so now we get a slightly different style, and if I hover over everything, we are getting a bit more variation, although hover and focus look a bit weird. The issue is, inside of a function button, if you look for example at hover, there for some reason we have a border width that might not have been in your project, but it did come up in mine. So you want to make sure for hover and focus you don't have a border width. Let's try this again. And now I can click on them. That is working pretty well. Now the entire thing actually looks alright. Perfect. With that, we have covered the styling. Alright, let's do this together now. Back inside of Godot, I want to go to theme and then work with this theme. Now, first of all, you want to make sure that you have saved it. In my case, I have lighttheme.tres. If you don't have that, go to the arrow and then save as, which I don't need to do because I already have the theme. If you have that, get rid of this theme, then the calculator looks terrible again, and then create a new theme that you want to save right away as inside of scenes, the dark theme. Once you have that, you can work with all of the individual parts. To get started, I want to work with the panel that's going to be the background. And in there, we want to once again add a style box texture. This is going to be a gradient texture 2D, where we want to have the colors going from bottom to top, vaguely like this. Then to adjust the colors, click on this thing, and then get darker colors. In my case, the darker color is going to be 1D, 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 while the lighter color is 3-1, 3-1, 3-1. On top of that, I want the darker color to start roughly in the middle, and then have it something like this. Effectively, you want to look at this area and just see what looks good. I'm quite happy with the result, so this is alright. Next up, we have the margin container. That one is super easy. Add type, and then set a margin bottom and a margin right, which are going to be 10 and 20 pixels. That's all we can do inside of the margin container, so this part is quite simple. And I guess while we are here, we can also update the grid container, because this one is also super simple. We only have two options, which should both be 0. 0 and 0. That way, there's not going to be any space between the buttons. After that, I want to work on the label, and first of all, add a font to it. The font for this one is going to be Unagio Bold, like so. And for the font size, I want to set a value of 80. I think the color already works, so I'm not going to touch that one. Next up, I want to work on the panel container, which is the background for all of the buttons. It's going to be a bit hard to see, but for now, this is going to be a style box flat. You can actually see it reasonably well. The color I went with is 191919. On top of that, I want to have shadows with 10 pixels, which is giving us the shadow below the number. And this value at the moment is a bit too strong, so let's set this to 40. Actually, still a bit too strong. 25. Righty, this is definitely coming together. Now we can work on the really important part, the buttons. In other words, I want to work on the button type. And to get started, I want to work with normal. This is going to be a style box empty. That way we cannot see any of the button background. After that, I want to go to the font and add Unagio medium. After that, for the really important part, the button font size. I went with 40 for this one, and that way all of this gets much more readable. And also for the colors, by default, this is alright. But once again, if I run the entire thing and hover over or have something focused, it looks a bit weird. So not ideal yet. To fix that, inside of the buttons, we have to adjust the values for hover and focus. Let's start with hover. This will be a style box flat, with the color being 1D, 1D, 1D. The same thing we are going to do to the focus style box. So style box flat, click on it, and then for the color 1D, 1D, 1D once again. Once we have that, the hovering looks much more appropriate, and if a button is focused, this is also looking significantly better. Cool, nice improvement. Now, one more thing that I do want to do, and that is, like we have done in the light theme, the buttons on the right should have a slightly different color. For that, we have to create a new theme type inside of the theme. But now we have to be careful in terms of naming. When you are clicking on one of these buttons, for example, for multiplying, we already have function button here as a type variation. And this we ideally don't want to change. So when you're creating a new type, you want to go with the name you have already chosen. That way we can use all of this for the light and for the dark theme. Or in other words, the type I want to add is called function button. This I want to add, and then select function button and select a button as the base type. Make sure you override all, and then you can see that the buttons have changed, which is exactly what we were looking for. So once again, we have to customize things. First of all, I want to have Unagio medium, and the font size should be 40. I also want to change the color. The default font color here should be a golden-ish color, which in my case is going to be DBC 700, which I also want to use for, let me add just a bit more space. I want to use the same color for focus and hover. So add the values in there like so. That way we get the same effect for focus and hover. Next up, we have to work on the style boxes. First of all, for the normal value, there shouldn't be anything. So we just want to add a style box empty. For hover and focus, you want to make sure that you are drawing the center and that you don't have any default values in here. Now you could go with the values we have chosen before, which was 1D, 1D, and 1D. Although I went with a slightly different color, 1F, 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 so the buttons look just a bit more different when they are being hovered over. Same with focus. I want to go with 1F, 1F, 1F. Once we have all of that, we get the different colors, and if I press on them, this is looking pretty good. And alright, that is working pretty well. That means next up, we have to figure out how to switch between the dark and the light theme. This will require just a bit of code. Fundamentally, all that I want to do is to check for input. So underscore input. And for this thing, we don't need the event. All that we want to do is check if input is action just pressed UI focus next, which is the tab button. If that is the case, we want to switch the theme, which at the moment is going to be a bit difficult because we don't have the themes available. For that, at the top, I want to create a var themes, which is going to be an array where we are preloading the dark theme and the light theme. So preload light theme.trace. The order here doesn't matter, just make sure you have both themes inside of the array. Besides that, I want to get a var theme underscore index, which needs to be an integer. The starting value for this thing should be 0, which is what we are getting by default. Once we have that, inside of the if statement for UI focus next, I want to get the theme index, and every time we are pressing tab, this value should increase. At the beginning it's 0, if you're pressing tab once, it's going to be 1, and that value we are using for indexing to get one of these values. Fundamentally, that really just means theme index plus 1. The issue with that though is we are very quickly getting outside of this array. To avoid that, we want to assign a new value, which is going to be theme index plus 1, and then mod 2. Or the length of this list if you have more entries. Once you have that, we simply want to get the theme of this node, then assign themes with the theme index. And then we are good to go. Let's try. We are starting with the dark theme, and if I press tab, we are getting to the light theme. And that is working perfectly. Functionality-wise, all of this is also working totally fine. So we are good to go. Now at this point though, I do realize there's a slightly weird behavior. When we are pressing tab to switch the theme, we are also going to the next UI element. Or if you look at this, we're always going to the next bit, which is fine for this project, but if you wanted to release all of this, you would want to change that. Maybe add a button or something. It really depends on your project.